Monday was Veterans Day, and it gave us all the opportunity to come together as Republicans and Democrats, independents alike, to express our immense gratitude to our veterans for putting on the uniform of the United States on behalf of our great country and on behalf of all of us. I just listened to my colleague from Colorado talk about our cherished veterans and their service, and he's a champion for our veterans. And he's absolutely right. Our veterans need to be at the front of the line for health care and getting the access to the best care possible. It hasn't always been the case. We've made some improvements in the last few years, and those are now being implemented. Not perfect, but thankfully, it's much better. And I heard that over Veterans Day. He also talked about our families. And the families of veterans also make sacrifices. And sometimes we forget that. And in the last several years, as the op tempo has been a little higher and families have had to sacrifice even more, we are particularly grateful for those families. The presiding officer today is one of our veterans here in the chamber. And as a Marine, he has served our country with distinction, and we appreciate him and all the other veterans here in the Senate. In my home state of Ohio, we have 850,000 veterans, roughly. Makes us a state that is particularly proud. We are a state that has produced some of the great American fighting men and women, heroes, from Ulysses S. Grant to Neil Armstrong. And when I go to veterans events, I am just inspired and overwhelmed by the families and the veterans I get to meet. On Veterans Day, I was in Blue Ash, Ohio, at a memorial that has been set aside for our veterans. It's a wonderful day in Blue Ash, but every day of the year, this memorial park is there, and it's beautiful. It commemorates veterans from every single war. There are 11 soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen who are representing each of the conflicts America has been engaged with, all the way from the American Revolution to the heroes of the global war on terror. And behind a description of each of those conflicts is this separate statue of a fighting man or woman. Most importantly to me, on Monday, on the other side of those statues were the veterans. And they were there from every conflict, from World War II right up to those soldiers who have recently come back from Afghanistan. Today, as we are here on the floor talking about our great veterans, there are soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, active duty in places all around the world, including in Syria, including in Afghanistan and Iraq. After I was at this event in Blue Ash, Ohio, I then went to Columbus, Ohio, and had the opportunity to go to the National Veterans Memorial Museum. This is a new, spectacular museum outside of Columbus, Ohio, and it is something that we are very proud of in Ohio. I took the lead here in the Senate to try to be sure we had the national designation, and we have that now. It's the National Veterans Memorial Museum, but it was funded almost entirely with private sector dollars. Over $75 million raised just from the private sector in the Columbus, Central Ohio area. President Trump signed legislation into law last year to designate it as the National Memorial, but it is a beautiful way to pay tribute to our veterans, mostly by stories. You walk in and there are storyboards about different veteran experiences. The facility itself is inspiring. One of the finest architectural designs, we're told, in the country the year that it was born, the year that it was built. When I went around and thanked veterans at this memorial, I heard the same thing I heard in Blue Ash, and I hear every time I thank a veteran, which is more or less this: thank you for your service. The response being, I was just doing my job. I was just doing my duty. Duty. I'm the son of a World War II veteran, the grandson of a World War I veteran. Duty is a word I heard a lot growing up. And service and honor. And for our country today, those words are very important to remember. So our veterans have played a key role in ensuring we have the freedoms we too often take for granted, but also there's a culture around veterans that we need to hear more and more of today, and we need to be sure our young people are hearing, which is this notion that service beyond self is important, that duty, honor, sacrifice is part of the fundamental values of our country. The fact that we have had such support for our veterans, to me, ought to also be translated into support for those who are in active duty. Because when I talk to our veterans about their concerns, yes, they talk about health care or disability, other issues that my office helps veterans on every day, and we're proud to do that. But what they also tell me is they want to be sure we're taking care of the troops. They want to be sure that we are honoring our veterans by ensuring that the men and women in uniform today who are out on the front lines for all of us are getting the support they need from the United States Congress. Unfortunately, we're letting them down right now. And whether it's the National Defense Authorization Bill, which is still in conference, which normally is a bipartisan bill that gets done quickly, that establishes the framework for how we provide readiness, how we provide the right weapons, being sure our soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors have the very best. But second, we're not even providing the funding bill this year. And we've tried. We've brought it to the floor here of the Senate, and we've asked for a vote on it. We've not been able to get that vote. So right now we're operating on what's called a continuing resolution, which is not good for the military. I was at the Youngstown Air Reserve Station last week, which is a reserve unit in Ohio that provides airlift capability and a spray mission for our military. They've got about 1,500 airmen, support people, pilots there. Very worried about the continuing resolution and its impact. They can't plan for training exercises. They can't plan for upgrades in their equipment to keep the cutting-edge technology that they want to have for safety for their pilots and the crews. I also heard, of course, a lot about the possibility of a government shutdown and how devastating that would be for our military. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is in Ohio. That's their top concern. So, unfortunately, I will tell you, although our highest priority here in the Senate ought to be ensuring that at a minimum our troops have what they need, we haven't done that this year. So I would urge my colleagues on both sides, let's figure out how to do what we typically do here, which is if we can't agree on everything in the spending bills, let's at least agree on providing this funding for our troops. By the way, it's particularly important this year because in that funding is a pay raise for the troops that they need badly. It's very important for Ohio. As I said earlier, one of those states that is proud of all the veterans that live there, all of the people from Ohio who have stood up and served their country, but we're also proud of our military facilities. Defense spending now accounts for 66,000 direct jobs in Ohio, more than $4 billion in salaries, and a more than $14 billion positive economic impact spread out over our 88 counties in Ohio. And we've got some great facilities. I mentioned Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Youngstown Air Reserve Station. We also have the Joint Systems Manufacturing Center in Lima, Ohio, which is the place where we make our tanks. During the Obama administration, that facility was nearly shut down. And a bunch of us led the fight. I led the fight here in the Senate to keep it open. And thank goodness we did. Today we need it. We need to be producing these tanks. We need to push back against the threats that we see. Our Army wants these vehicles, armored vehicles, including Strykers and tanks. But we're very proud of that facility in Ohio. We want to be sure that, again, we have the funding for it so that we can move forward. In this appropriation bill is funding for new tanks and new Stryker vehicles. The spray facility I talked about, Youngstown Air Reserve Station, they need new airplanes. They need to have upgrades. Right now, they need to be sure that the funding we have in this appropriation bills goes because it actually enables them to construct a gate for the facility that is safe, because the Homeland Security folks have told them their current gate does not protect the base properly, and so we have funding in this legislation to be able to do that. I remain concerned that we're not coming together, as we do for our veterans, for our active duty. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have repeatedly blocked these procedural motions to move the bill forward, but their disagreements seem to be more with broader issues. You know, how we're going to fund other issues, maybe including the wall on the southwest border, from what they say. Let's deal with that bill separately. but let's not take it out on our troops. Let's not make our troops a pawn in these political fights. The funding bill we have was drafted on a bipartisan basis. It also is bicameral in the sense that the House bill for the defense appropriation bill this year is very similar to the Senate bill. The United States and the defense framework we've built over the years with our allies is under siege in places like Iran, China, North Korea, Turkey, and Russia. And while we fight over funding our defenses here, their arsenals, those countries' arsenals, continue to grow. So I've heard from every branch of the military on this. And again, they all say the same thing. Failing to pass this funding agreement and defaulting to a continuing resolution, God forbid we go to a government shutdown, but even a continuing resolution where the funding wouldn't increase negatively affects their ability to carry out their missions. For the Army, by the way, that means delaying procurement of critical equipment like their next-generation combat vehicle and land-based hypersonic missiles. But it also means more than 4,000 military family and single soldier dwellings would not be awarded to service members, and that nearly 300 military housing units in desperate need of repair won't get the upkeep they need. For the Navy, they tell me failing to pass the appropriations bill will mean delaying the start of nearly 36 new critical military construction projects and creates a nearly $2 billion shortfall for research and development, among other things. By the way, that includes holding research into artificial intelligence, AI development, which is critical right now. China is making great strides in that area. We've got to be sure that we are more than keeping up. For the Air Force, this funding is necessary to field the new F-15EX fighter plane, they tell me, to maintain and improve, of course, the F-35 fleet, and to help recruit and train new pilots to operate these state-of-the-art aircraft. In Ohio, a CR will negatively impact our operations at Wright-Patterson and the critical work we do for our nation at NASIC, which is a counterintelligence operation, among other things, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And again, failing to pass the agreement will also keep us from moving forward with the across-the-board 3.1% pay increase for our troops, which is key to ensuring they're fairly compensated for their hard work and the sacrifices we've talked about today. It'll be the largest pay raise in a decade, and they shouldn't be prevented from getting it because of our political differences here on other issues. Anyone who's read the Constitution will tell you that the very first stated purpose of the federal government is to, and I quote, provide for the common defense. That's our fundamental responsibility here. If we can't put aside these partisan disagreements and reach an agreement to fund our armed forces, we're failing to carry out those duties. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope politics can be put aside and we can agree soon to give our men and women in uniform the comprehensive support that they need. Because when you meet veterans, as I did on Veterans Day across our state, you can't help but wonder where they'd be if they didn't have the funding they needed when they were out there, putting their lives on the line for all of us. And again, to honor our veterans, we have to also honor our active duty. It's critical to our men and women in uniform, and it's critical to our national security. Mr. President, I yield back.